Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the predictive AI world. We have a rich audience today attending from across North America, and I'm excited to be hosting all of you today in this exciting session around customer journey experience. I'm your host. My name is Malay Upadhyay, and I'm the CMO at SalesChoice. The Predictive AI World is a platform that we have launched to educate the audience on the different AI use cases, risks, and cautionary notes in sales, marketing, and the entire organizational ecosphere, really. We have hosted webinars, we have hosted podcasts, video series with experts from around the industry in North America, from financial to manufacturing and so on. I encourage you to go check out these links at a free time. Of course, we'll be sharing all of this after the webinar as well. But to begin the session today, I'm joined by two extremely powerful and knowledgeable experts when it comes to the customer journey experience. Joining me, as always, is our CEO and founder, Dr. Cindy Gordon. And along with her, we have today Julian Phipps, who is the Director of Canada for Business Development at EmailAge, an email risk score company. I let them both say hello as Cindy takes this away with questions directed towards Julian to understanding how we arrive at solutions around the system. Cindy?
Thanks, Malay, and welcome everyone. And just so privileged to have Julian here with us. You can catch up on my profile. It's all over the web. But Julian, we're really honored to have you with us today. So share a little bit about your profile and what EmailAge is all about.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Cindy, and thank you, Malay, as well. And everything is, very. It's been such a great time right now in our company. We've been growing at what we call our hyper growth mode, a lot of investment going on. And in my background, I've got, of course, my LinkedIn profile as well. But very quickly here, my background comes from the finance world and banking, having been in the credit union system in Canada with the largest credit union in Canada for many years. And following that, a couple of stops in startup world, then on to the world of SaaS and technology solutions. So now it's brought me to EmailAge, and happy to be growing the market there. And it's been basically what a ride, I gotta say.
Thanks, Julian. I'm going to get underway and just do a little bit of stage setting in terms of the importance of AI. We are going to allow a lot of time near the end for all of you online, so please send in your questions early. We've organized a set of questions to have a dialogue between Julian and I. Malay will pipe in, as she always does, in his wonderful high-energy way. We're going to then zoom into some specific use cases, so we actually talk about the value of some of these capabilities. I think that's really important. There's a lot of discussion on what AI is, but not always what's the value in terms of real business impact. So want to be clear on that side. So first of all, in terms of the market landscape, I don't think you can pick up any newspaper today or any publication without some point of view in terms of AI. And, there's kind of always, you'll find two perspectives there. You'll find the positive high energy, and then you will certainly have the sensitivities and concerns and the impact this will have maybe to privacy, risk, etc. And you also see internationally different countries approaching AI and the frameworks, and we're all kind of evolving at different paces. But the most important point, it's the most significant change in the history of mankind. I look at this often as the biggest tsunami wave that I've ever certainly seen in my lifetime. And the sheer volume of the growth of the market, earlier indicators that the market was growing around 30% compound annual growth rate. We're now seeing things at 60%, which is just unheard of. And I think one of the factors, that's important to understand is we're seeing this intersection between the incredible speed of blockchain growth, Internet of Things with the sensor technologies and smart, intelligent infrastructures, and where AI, quite frankly, is underpinning everything. We always joke here at SalesChoice when we hear people say that AI is the new electricity, because it's not the new electricities, it's actually the new oxygen. It's permeating everything, every single layer. And so it's an exciting time to be leading in this kind of an industry. Just to go down a few levels in terms of simple definition of AI, I mean, obviously, you can all go to Mr. Google. Maybe it's Mrs. Google or Mr. and Mrs. Google. I'm not sure there's a persona there yet, but you know, you can literally find everything out there these days. The most important point is that AI isn't a new field. It's actually been here, and some of the algorithms and approaches we're using were in 1956. You know, a lot of the growth has come about as a result of the supercomputing power. And actually, businesses are ready because there's the sheer accumulation of data, and that proliferation of data as, you know, it's finding, you know, the gems in those large data sets. So it's all about mimicking human behavior, and there's many, many different approaches, whether you're sensing the world, you know, with AI, whether you're text mining, trying to analyze and filter things, so you might be using predictive insights. Maybe you're acting on that information in terms of intelligent workflow based on triggers and cues to move things along. And I think the other aspect is in these solutions with machine learning, there's always a feedback loop. So as new data comes in, things gets recalibrated, new patterns form, new clusters. I think what's really important as well is to make sure that the data that's flowing through these systems, you know, doesn't have data bias, and that's actually one of the biggest issues. I was actually receiving the AI Impact Award yesterday in Ottawa, in Canada, and we had a lot of speakers talk about, you know, 80% of the data sets are flawed. So those are pretty staggering numbers when you hear that the bias is in there. So, you know, the algorithms are only as good as good as the cleanliness of the data sets, and there's a lot of risks inherently in data. So, so that's you know, our sort of view of that. We put this slide together just to step back and put in context. It's not that analytics is new, as I've already mentioned, but we have an evolution, certainly in terms of the types of intelligence that are moving into organizations. You know, BI, business intelligence or descriptive analytics, is certainly alive and well, and but they've been very rear view mirror oriented, and the world's moving far too fast to only look at data in the past. But data in the past can be an incredible predictor for looking ahead, when that's where AI can make a difference in the predictive analytics space. And you know, what we've learned there is that it's really a mashup of different disciplines that need to come together. So it's not a one-trick pony by any means. The newer area, which is still very much emerging, is, well, you've given me a score, you've given me a prediction, what will happen. So what do I do with it? Which moves into, you know, what can you do with AI so that the coaching becomes, or alerts become, highly automated and giving people context to move to action. And that area, there's a lot of creativity going on, because at the end of the day, one thing is surfacing a risk, but you know, you've got to go and execute and mitigate that and make sure it's a closed loop process. As things continue and algorithms and, you know, particularly genetic algorithms come into the market, we're going to see far more integration and mimicking the human brain in a very detailed way. And that area is when these systems become generative and really deeper learning environments. That area will come under a lot of evaluation, because when you get into the deeper aspects of the cognitive side, it's harder to regulate and harder to know what's being manifested. So the cognitive side, you know, is going to be, you know, probably the most challenging area from a regulatory point of view, but we are into a spectrum, and like I said earlier, AI will underlie everything. Maybe one last point before we open it up to our discovery conversation, that I think is really fundamental. When you do any business case for BI, you typically aren't going to get a return of investment beyond about 80%. In AI, usually the business cases come in between 100% and up. I mean, they are fast. More often than not, on our side, we can prove out a business case in just one transaction and becomes the return for the entire investment cycle. So, you've got to look at these kinds of business ROIs really on a trajectory point of view. The systems learn over time. So those are some comments there. Let's turn it over to Julian now. And because, Julian, you've been really out there and your company's very much been pioneering. And you can see how important with all the data breadcrumbs that are out in the digital highways. So why, is your firm so focused on sort of the importance of the customer journey and the risk attributions as with what you can do as a company?
Yeah, great question, Cindy, and yeah, thanks again for this platform to discuss with you today as well, and our listeners. And really, I think what it's kind of come down to in terms of companies that are dabbling and also more at an expert level with their business intelligence and use of AI is that they're starting to really understand their targeted consumer or customer. And the definition behind really the customer journey is the complete sum of all of their experiences that a customers go through when they're interacting with their company or brand online and in person for that matter. But instead of just looking at one part of that transaction or experience, it's really the customer journey that kind of documents their full all of their touch points that they interact with online with them. And this is where really, AI, as well as, leveraging the data elements that may be collected online on behalf of the customers and what about them, and even where we come into play at Emailage is layering in these different intelligence data points to provide them with more information about their prospective customer or new customer. It really begins to help them not only transact online more frequently or perhaps with more purpose and intent, but they can start to specify the experience and really take it to the next level, and also help that become a lot more frictionless. So there's quite a few different benefits in terms of why understanding this customer journey is so important, but it also begins way back at the business planning stage. Once you plan your business fundamentals correctly from its earliest branding, what is your brand, and filtering that through to the whole customer journey experience, that's where you start to really see how your brand stands apart, what's your unique offering, and then layering in the AI and business intelligence in that is just that X factor that will really raise your business's game to the next level.
Thanks, Julian. Let's move now, Julian, to introduce the capabilities of Emailage in terms of your email risk score.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and thanks. Yeah. So for Emailage, or as sometimes people say Emailage, it's the same thing with Target or Target. We go by many names, but at the end of the day, it's really what we're doing behind the scenes. And for Emailage, we started back in 2012, one of the pioneering companies, as you mentioned earlier, Cindy, and we really started to understand, our founders did anyhow, in terms of why the use of an email address as a data element was so pivotal and so crucial and powerful for that matter. Fraudsters that exist out there today still need to gain control of one of two key elements typically to fully conduct their fraudulent or different malicious attacks. So those two elements are the email address. They've got to have some sort of communication tool for the email address, and sometimes it diverts back to controlling a phone number, your phone number, or perhaps creating one in its place. So there's a lot of things that fraudsters are doing these days, whether it be social engineering, which is essentially being able to manipulate information and individuals and humans for that matter to divulge personal information for their gain, ultimate fraudulent gain. And so where we come into play at Email Age is being able to leverage some of the data that you're collecting up front, such as that email address, but also other elements that include your phone device information, the phone number, information behind the phone number that you might be registering with at any given platform online, and even correlating that to address. What is your billing and shipping address? What is your IP and device location? So all of these informations get correlated onto our system and are being put through the AI algorithms. Then what we do is are able to send you back information within under 1 second, and that allows any business to layer that into their decision making or transaction authentication process and really leverage this global network of information that we have when we work with all of our customers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think as you continue on and the diverse number of inputs, and I know that you've got some really clear visualizations on the connector layers there, which is obviously key. It's kind of that network effect that you've learned. You keep adding more and more layers of intelligence in.
Yeah, that's correct. And really it's about, one of the things that really makes us stand apart is that given the fact that we are one of the early entrants into the marketplace, we really leveraged the data aspect and how we kept our environment clean. You mentioned some of the biases and risks earlier in our discussion here, and that stands true. Even when you're building, a true data kind of element environment where you're looking at some of the data elements that are coming into your environment from your customers. For example, when we collect information that is anonymized and absorbed onto our network from retailers that are seeing good transactions and as well as the reporting back on the bad ones that they have confirmed that are fraudulent, that is being populated onto our network. And so for that 7+ years now that we've been growing this network of this database of both positive and negative signals, we're able to paint kind of a very clear picture on who is Cindy online in terms of that customer that's newly registered to another site now, right? And is coming to perhaps, conduct different e-commerce transactions online. And so if we can give you that insight, before she comes online right away, or before that customer decides to, be granted a loan for online lending, different lending platforms, this is the type of information that companies are beginning to really leverage as another layer of risk mitigation.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. I know we're kind of touching on some of the context of this question from the answer side, but we're really talking about the multiple touch points that can be leveraged to really give you insights on your customer journey. So I'm going to let you continue on because I think this next part really pulls all the puzzle pieces together, and you can just indicate to next slide when you're ready for us to advance.
Absolutely, great. So I guess what we're seeing on this slide right now is why the email address was so important. And as alluded to earlier, is that when you think about it, all of our social media and different online personas and accounts that we are leveraging these days and utilizing are really tied back to an email address. And for good actors online like you and I and a bunch of other people, they typically would have had their email at least 91% of them have had it for 3 years or more. And this is a DMA study conducted that gave us some of this information. And out of this study, there was also 51% of those users that have had their emails for more than 10 years. So I fall into this category, and you may change your work email sometimes more frequently, or perhaps different reasons. But when moving when moving different information around, you might move your home address more frequently, you might switch your phone number more frequently, but this email address tends to be that global identifier that kind of stays relevant and stays the same because it has some stickiness to all of these other sites that you're using. So next slide. What we're seeing here is really what the model looks like for email age. And we've got basically a predictive risk intelligence network that is able to look at these different elements amongst others. And really at the core, as you're seeing in this wheel, is the email address, which can produce up to about 30 other individual data signals that we provide back on the email address alone. When we combine that with the IP address, if you're collecting information on behalf of your customer by IP address, we can see typically a 50% increase in the ability to detect and prevent the fraud. And when we add in other elements such as the phone number, billing and shipping address, those two elements would add another kind of 20% of certainty in terms of the risk score that we're providing. And customer name matching, first name, last name, and domain name, domain information, all of these are combined with other elements that might be more unique to your business. And then we're able to send out this risk score. And the risk score really is meant to just provide and absorb something that by the human eye can just understand and divulge as 1 being not risky and 1,000 is really a riskiest level, and they fall into different risk band buckets. So if you have different risk bands from 1 through 6 for email age, we start to notice that when you're looking at the volume that comes through to your business in risk bands 1 and 2, these are low risk categories. We'll push that through. We typically recommend that those levels are pushed through for your business as good signals and good customers coming through the door. And once you get to neutral level 3, this is where we may not have as much information. And then moving on to levels 4 to 6, it progresses to information that is more risky to suspected fraud and definitely fraudulent events that have occurred. So yeah, that just kind of gives you an overview of the actual methodology behind our risk score, and more importantly, I guess, getting on to the next slide, we'll see how the network and the power of the network really plays a part. So here are just some of our top industries and verticals that we deal in. We're fortunate to work with a lot of the top players in their industry. And the reason why they're leveraging our solution is really because they have found value in the fact that we're able to give them signals on these individuals that they are transacting with or potentially doing business with. And not only is it a good indicator of a risk factor, but now different permutations of how they leverage this data is being applied. So think about your marketing department and how they want to best spend some of their marketing dollars. Well, now, in a way, you can start segmenting some of the use of different offers or targeted offers to, different, segments or clusters of your customers. If they have good signals behind certain customers, you may want to offer them, a preferential rate, or, if you've got, versus some less strong indication of a good customer. Perhaps, in the lending world, as an example, they might offer a different rate to these individuals or a different type of offer. So we're seeing different ways to kind of leverage data, both for, internal marketing purposes, sales driven causes, as well as just the fraud and the risk mitigation that we've seen.
Julian, before we leave the slide here, quick question. Are you starting to, scrape or access other third-party data sources that can give further insight, whether it's in social media channels at all? Just curious if you're starting to look at those kinds of behaviors as well, or is it all more email-centric dynamics?
Great question. Yeah, so at the core of it is always the email, but to gain insight, we do look at third-party information and different API connections that we will also leverage. Part of the challenge is maintaining a solution that can give back, rapid responses. When you're calling out to other different third parties, sometimes that will slow down this solution that occurs in under a second. And for some of our largest e-commerce use cases, as well as credit card providers that need to authenticate transactions within milliseconds, I mean, some of our average SLA times for them will be in the 17 millisecond range. So it depends on what we look at, but to get to the crux of the matter here, we do look at publicly available social media. So, anything that's not private, we'll look at the open source stuff, the things that you and I may have put on the web and made it publicly available. And, we'll correlate that to, the ability to name match, to determine if their social media profile has, a lot of friends, for example, is a good indicator sometimes of the fact that, it's not a profile that was created overnight. And there's different ways to kind of leverage some of this information and correlate it all together so that it strengthens the signals that we offer our clients.
Thanks, Julian.